going, and the reason this is a microcosm is because this is what's going on at this hour. All this talk about weapons of mass destruction and that sort of business there, every one of those weapons is the product of people who have been given exquisite gifts of mind and exquisite gifts to develop them. And now they're using them just for a buck to make human destruction. Where's the equivalent of the Hippocratic Oath for scientists? That they won't use their knowledge for the destruction of human beings.
In August of 1945, the city of Hiroshima was destroyed in about 9 seconds by a single atomic bomb. The man responsible for building the bomb was a gentle and eloquent physicist named J. Robert Oppenheimer. This is the story of Robert Oppenheimer and the atomic bomb.
Stinson Beach, California, August 7th, 1945. Dear Oppie, you are probably the most famous man in the world today, and yet I am not sure that this letter will reach you. But if it does, I want you to know that we are very proud of you. And if it doesn't, you will know it anyway. We have been irritated by your reticence these past few years, but under the itchy surface, we knew that it was all right, that the work was progressing, that the heart was still there, and the warm being we have known and cherished. I can understand now, as I could guess then, the somber note in you during our last meetings. There is a weight in such a venture which few men in history have had to bear. I know that with your love of men, it is no light thing to have had a part, and a great part, in a diabolical contrivance for destroying them. But in the possibilities of death are also the possibilities of life. You have made history. We are happy for you.
You may well ask why people with a kind heart and humanist feelings, why they would go and work on weapons of mass destruction.
When J. Robert Oppenheimer was born in 1904, the atomic bomb was not yet even science fiction. He was educated at the Ethical Culture School in New York and mastered Harvard's curriculum in 3 years, summa cum laude. He spoke 6 languages and seriously considered becoming an architect, a poet, or a scientist. But it was his love of physics that led him to England and Germany in the 1920s, where the atom was beginning to yield its secrets to Einstein, Rutherford, and Bohr. European scientists would later remember him as the quick and eccentric young American who devoured both theoretical physics and 16th century French poetry. One of his best friends was the young American writer, Francis Ferguson.
Well, when I first knew him, he knew nothing about politics. He never read the newspaper. He was extremely ignorant about practical matters, and he didn't care about them. His whole life was in the intellect.
He did not keep up with current events. He read novels, or he read philosophy books, or serious books. But all of a sudden, and I think it was due in large part to Hitler and to the Nazi persecution of the Jews, that he suddenly, I think it must have been fairly suddenly, he suddenly realized that things were getting out of hand and that something had to be done about it by serious people. So he began reading.
He was a tremendous intellect. I don't believe I have known another person who was quite so quick in comprehending.
Hans Bethe, Nobel laureate.
In comprehending both scientific and general knowledge.
At Berkeley, he'd read the Bhagavad Gita and learned Sanskrit, and was really taken by the charm and the kind of general wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita. And some people seem to think he was got very religiously involved in it, but that's not true at all, I think.
The late 1930s. While America endured a Great Depression, fascism seethed in Germany, a civil war raged in Spain, and Oppenheimer moved further to the left.
I suppose that
Freeman Dyson, physicist.
he was at that time profoundly impressed with the precariousness of the Allied situation, that after all, most of his friends were Europeans, many of them in countries which had been occupied by the Germans. The Germans looked as though they were the wave of the future at that time.
He said there's the danger that this may mean the end of Western civilization.
My brother viewed it as not just something persecuting our own relatives, but as a kind of thing that could be a wave that would walk over the United States as well.
He wanted to help. He thought probably the best way to do this, where he had most competence, would be in the atomic bomb work. And therefore, it was natural for him, almost necessary for him, that this is where he would put his effort. He built the atomic bomb, or he didn't build it, but he led the effort to build the atomic bomb because he thought this was necessary to save Western civilization.
I was caught up in the war effort and with a patriotic fever that's hard to imagine nowadays. It's been so long since anything of that kind has motivated seems to have motivated Americans, and one would have done anything that was necessary to get on with the war.
The bomb project had a sudden urgency. The U.S. Army was given charge and codenamed it the Manhattan District, with General Leslie Groves in command, and secret laboratories scattered across the country. Groves put Oppenheimer in charge of a group at Berkeley to explore the basic scientific requirements of an atomic bomb. Oppenheimer, who had taken to wearing a rakish pork pie hat, took pleasure in his new official title, Coordinator of Rapid Rupture.
That was the time when the big change in his life occurred. And it must have been during that time that the dream somehow got hold of him of really producing a nuclear weapon, which other people had been talking about, that he was the fellow who really did it.
It is a very different attitude if you want to find out the deep secrets of nature, which is what he had wanted to do before. And on the other hand, if you want to produce something, to produce a mechanism that works. It was a different problem, different attitude, and he completely changed to fit the new role.
Yes, it was a good time. It was a good time in America. It was a good time to be American. It was a time when the whole country was pulling together in a cause which even now I think was just. That is, the idea that the Nazis would, Nazi Germany would win that war could have led to, it seemed to me, 1,000 years of dark ages, and everything that we meant by civilization could have come to an end. That's what it seemed to me was what the fight was about, or something pretty close to that, and most Americans felt that, and most Americans were in it just as hard as they could be.
In late 1944, American intelligence learned that the German atomic bomb effort had failed. Nevertheless, shortly afterwards, Los Alamos scientists picked up the pace and began working 6-day weeks.
Where everything was coming together, everything was going at a very rapid rate. We were building up to the Trinity test at that time. A great deal of production devices to be used in the atomic bomb were being made. Everybody was working day and night. And it was very hard in the push to make that test to stop and think.
I said, what do you young men do in the evening for pleasure? And they said, we go back to the lab and stay till midnight.
As I remember I would work almost every night till I'd nearly drop, then go home, sleep a bit, and then come back, Saturdays and Sundays, just constantly working.
Across the Pacific, the war raged on against Japan, but in the spring of '45, there was victory in Europe. The Nazis had never come close to building an atomic bomb. Germany surrendered. VIII Day. Eisenhower returned triumphant.
I would like to think now that I, at the time of the German defeat, that I would have stopped, taken stock, thought it all over very carefully, and that I would have walked away from Los Alamos at that time. And in terms of all of everything that I believe in, before and during and after the war, I cannot understand why I did not make that act. On the other hand, it simply was not in the air. I do not know of a single instance of anyone who had made that suggestion or who did leave at the time. There might have been someone that I didn't know, but at the time, it just was not something that was part of our lives. Our life was directed to do one thing. It's as though we had been programmed to do that, and we, as automatons, were doing it.
Amazing how the technology tools trap one. I mean, they're so powerful that when I was impressed because most of the sort of fervor for developing the bomb came in a kind of anti-fascist fervor against Germany. But when VIII Day came along, nobody slowed up one little bit. No one said, well, the main thing, it doesn't matter now. We all kept working, and it wasn't because we understood the significance against Japan. It was because the machinery had caught us in its trap, and we were anxious to get this thing to go.
I organized a small meeting at our building. I think the title was The Impact of the Gadget on Civilization. Hoppy tried to persuade me not to have it. I don't know quite why, but he certainly did try to dissuade me. On the other hand, I went ahead and did hold a meeting, and perhaps between 30 and 50 people came. Hoppy came too, which added always added tone to any meeting. We did discuss whether we should go on or not, and in the context of what was happening in the world. Of course, it was called in the context that perhaps what we were doing was morally wrong. Particularly, Hoppy pointed out that, but it would be well that the world knew about the possibility of an atomic bomb rather than it be something that would be kept secret while the United Nations was being formed. On that basis, on that logical basis, we all decided that that was right and that we ought to go back in the laboratory and work as hard as we could to demonstrate a nuclear weapon before so that the United Nations would be set up in the awareness of this horrible thing to come.
The Faustian bargain is when you sell your soul to the devil in exchange for knowledge and power. And that, of course, in a way is what Oppenheimer did, there's no doubt. He made this alliance with the United States Army in the person of General Groves, who gave him undreamed of resources, huge armies of people and as much money as he could possibly spend in order to do physics on the grand scale, in order to create this marvelous weapon. And it was a Faustian bargain, if ever there was one. And of course, we are still living with it ever since. When once you sell your soul to the devil, then there's no going back on it.
Well, I can't tell you exactly, but right over there between here and the high part of the Oscura Mountains, there where that little peak is on the McDonald Ranch, is where they detonated the first atomic bomb.
What was this country like then?
About like it is now.
200 miles south of Los Alamos, near Alamogordo, New Mexico, a vast unbroken stretch of prairie. Here, Robert Oppenheimer chose to test the first atomic bomb. He named the place Trinity Site. It had been Apache country, but in late '44 it was populated only by a handful of cattle ranchers and homesteaders. They called it by the Spanish name, Jornada del Muerto, the journey of death. Dave McDonald.
I was put out of here in '42.
Who put you out of here?
The Corps of Engineers and federal judge and so forth. And so said they had to have it for air-to-air gunnery range and so forth, you see. And later on, why it wound up being this, you see, when they got the atomic bomb to working, why they come in for a place and then they selected this right here. At that time, they were living, that is, the people that was assembling this bomb and preparing to shoot it was there at my place. Somewhere around 500 to 700 people, they said there. And living in my house and around it and so forth, you see, with other buildings and so forth.
It began with 15 men in December. By May, there were several hundred civilians and GIs working in secret. At night, nearby ranchers heard gunfire. GIs hunting antelope with submachine guns.
About 1939, I think it was, on the frontispiece of Time magazine, they had a picture of an atom buster at the University of California. And when they shipped the shell in for this experimental detonation down here, why, I said, if I didn't think I was crazy or something, I think maybe they're fooling around with busting atoms or doing something with atomic power. And I was just talking because I certainly didn't know anything about it. I had no conception of what an atomic bomb was or what the violence of it and the strength of it.
When I arrived there, they were in the process of, in the end of May, of constructing a 100-foot tall tower in this desert, which was really a very empty, wasn't sandy, but it was a typical dry, sagebrushy desert with one wall off to the east of rock, and a base camp, which had a couple of extra buildings, but which really was just some old ranch houses. People were feverishly setting up wires all over the desert, building the tower, building little huts in which to put cameras and house people at the time the bomb went off. The Army had just accidentally bombed the place a little bit before I got there, but nobody was hurt.
The work had been so frantic that it was a relief to know that it was coming to a conclusion. And we knew that they were preparing the big experiment to see if the gadget, as it was called, would work.
What did you expect?
What did I expect?
Françoise Ulam.
I had mixed feelings. I wanted it to succeed because it would help to end the war. I didn't want it to be dangerous. Of course, there was a chance that it would be could be very dangerous.
The 11th of July, 1945, an unmarked Pontiac sedan arrives at the McDonald Ranch carrying the world's entire supply of plutonium, about 10 pounds. The courier demands a receipt, approximate value $1 billion. At Oppenheimer's request, General Groves has made a secret arrangement with the governor of New Mexico to evacuate the state in case of catastrophe.
Now, prior to the shot, back in the lab, there had been some speculation that it might be possible to explode the atmosphere, in which case the world disappears.
Did you sense a lot of anxiety in your brother?
a lot of anxiety in everybody, including my brother, both whether it would work or not work.
Frank Oppenheimer, physicist.
I think mostly that, but also it was, you see, it was a time in which I think his interest in using the bomb to help produce a better world didn't happen just after the war, but he really had hoped that Truman would tell Stalin about it fairly forthrightly. Of course, that didn't happen and set the stage almost at that instant to the Cold War rather than to a warmer humanity. And so I think both of those things seemed, everything there was worrying him a great deal.
There was building up tremendous, almost hysterical anxiety. Many people feeling that we couldn't possibly hold the test because every time we tested some component that had to do with the test, it would fail. Everybody was rushing around. Things did not appear to be ready. Yet there did seem to be a certain momentum to the work that was going on that we would make a test. I think it had been put back several times, but on July 16th that there would be the test come hell or high water.
Memo, 11 July, 1700 hours. Both charges completely papered. Work another night shift if necessary to complete this job. Request personnel as necessary. Memo, 12 July, 1600 hours. Seal all holes in case. Wrap with Scotch wrap. Box charges, inner and outer, with 2 spares for each. Memo, 13 July, 1300 hours. Assembly starts. Remove polar cap and dummy plug. Gadget now belongs to tamper people. G engineers work until 1600 with active material insertion. Dummy plug hole is covered with a clean cloth and explosives people take over. Insert HE. This is to be done as slowly as the G engineers wish. Remove all chains. Clear the deck.
Well, I expected that what they were working on, they were going to try.
July, 0800 hours. Rig guidelines, lift to tower top. Ready for X unit at 0900. Bring up G engineer's footstool. 14 July, 0900 hours. Wiring of the X unit proceeds under the direction of the explosives people. Tower platform should be tested with concrete weight as per Oppenheimer. Detonators placed to conform with requirements of informer switches. HE people stand by to criticize potential rough handling. Note that once detonators are on sphere, no live electrical connection can be brought to the X unit, informer unit, or anywhere else on the sphere. All testing must be done before sphere is lifted to tower. After that, it is too late. 14 July, 1700 hours. Gadget complete. Should we have the chaplain here? The betting pool cost $1. Edward Teller bet on a blast equal to 45,000 tons of TNT. Oppenheimer bet low, 3,000 tons. And I.I. Robbie put his money on 20 kilotons. Young technicians were horrified to overhear Enrico Fermi taking side bets on the possibility of incinerating the state of New Mexico.
The test was set at midnight. The prediction was there'd be 60-mile visibility and a certain wind pattern. Well, at midnight, it was raining cats and dogs, lightning and thunder, really scared about this object there in the tower. It'd be set off accidentally. So you can imagine the strain on Oppenheimer, on Robert Oppenheimer, this.
I remember it was one of my memories of that time having to go up the tower to turn on a piece of equipment. So I was one of the last, not the last person by any means, but one of the last people to get our equipment that was right next to the bomb have it all turned on and tested before starting the test. And it was quite dramatic because lightning was striking all around. It was quite a fierce storm going on. In particular, one had a certain amount of respect for that atomic bomb being right next to us. Sparks seemed to be flying. Did give me a little bit of a sense of apprehension.
I think he and I were lying down right next to each other, flat in the desert, right outside the control hut at the time the bomb went off.
And we had prepared ourselves with glass, and when we could hear the countdown, when it went off, we all were looking through the glass, and then we saw what was just a tremendous, overpowering vision of this thing happening, seeing the mountains small beside it, seeing perhaps with some kind of beauty, but awesome was what I would call it, as it slowly developed, went up in the air, and made the whole desert light up as at noon and appear small. A large desert rimmed by mountains appear to be a small place. And that was just something that once that had happened, I was a different person from then on.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are you amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit.
As it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.
O my Jesus, forgive us
our sins,
save us from the fires of hell. Lead all souls to heaven,
especially
those most in need of thy mercy.